It was a late autumn afternoon when I decided to take a solo hiking trip into the wilderness. I had been hiking for years, spending countless weekends exploring trails in various forests and mountains. It was my thing, a way to disconnect from everything, clear my head, and just be alone in nature. But this trip, for some reason, felt different. Something about the air that day was heavier, the wind colder, and the trees seemed more silent than usual. I had chosen a trail that I hadn't done before. It was supposed to be a moderate route, a loop through dense forest and over some rocky terrain. The sort of hike I could easily complete in a few hours, maybe a little longer if I took my time. I had all my gear, sturdy boots, a light backpack with water, a first aid kit, and a small flashlight in case I got caught in the dark. I wasn't worried. I'd done this 1,000 times before. The start of the trail was quiet, peaceful even. The forest was thick with pine and oak, and the ground was covered in a thick layer of fallen leaves that crunched underfoot with every step. The air smelled earthy, fresh, and it made me feel grounded. I set a steady pace, just enjoying the rhythm of my steps, breathing deeply, and taking in the beauty around me. The sun was dipping lower in the sky, but there was still plenty of daylight left. As I moved deeper into the woods, the trail began to narrow, and the trees grew taller and closer together. The wind had picked up slightly, rustling the leaves above me. There were moments when I thought I heard something else. The sound of footsteps, maybe, or something scraping against the bark of a tree. But I told myself it was just the wind playing tricks. After all, I was alone in the woods, and I'd learned to ignore the odd sounds over the years. But then it happened. I reached a small clearing, a space where the trees parted, and I could see the open sky above. It was quiet here, unnervingly so. The usual hum of birds and insects was absent. I stopped for a moment to take a swig of water from my bottle, trying to shake off the odd sensation that something wasn't right. That's when I noticed something on the ground near the edge of the clearing. It was small at first, almost unnoticeable, but then I realized it was a broken piece of gear. A torn piece of a backpack, maybe, or a strap. The fabric was worn and frayed, like it had been out here for a while. I frowned. It wasn't the first time I had seen signs of other hikers, but this didn't feel like a usual trail sign. The thing that unnerved me was the fact that there was no other sign of life. No other tracks, no recent footprints in the soft earth. Just this small, torn piece of fabric. I crouched down to examine it more closely when I heard something behind me. A snap of a twig. I froze. My heart rate picked up, and I slowly turned my head, expecting to see another hiker or maybe a couple of deer in the distance. But there was nothing. Only the darkening woods behind me. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I stood up, quickly brushing off the unease. I needed to keep moving. I had planned to finish the trail before it got dark, and I didn't want to waste any more time on distractions. But the feeling didn't go away. It clung to me, following me through the trees. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed louder than it should have been. It felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. I kept walking, hoping that the sensation would fade as I moved farther down the trail. But the deeper I went, the more unsettled I became. There was something wrong, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The sounds of the forest had faded completely now, replaced by an eerie stillness that made the air feel thick. My breathing became shallow, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder far more often than I ever had before. Then, just as I was starting to think I had imagined everything, I heard it again, a faint sound, almost like someone whispering from just out of sight. I spun around, heart racing, expecting to see someone, a fellow hiker, maybe, but there was nothing, only the towering trees and the dimming light of the setting sun. It had been a few hours since I started the hike, and the sun was low now, casting long shadows across the trail. I knew I should be heading back, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around just yet. The thought of retracing my steps through the unnerving woods didn't sit well with me, but I didn't know what else to do. The trail was too remote to just stop and camp for the night, and I had no signal on my phone to call for help if something went wrong. I pushed forward, my steps growing faster, more anxious. The woods seemed to close in around me as the trail narrowed again, and I had to duck under low-hanging branches to keep going. The air was getting colder, the temperature dropping rapidly as the sun sank lower. It felt like I was being surrounded by something, like the trees themselves were shifting, creeping closer, as if they had become a living, breathing thing. I finally reached a fork in the trail, one I hadn't seen on the map. The path to the left looked overgrown, barely a trail at all, while the path to the right seemed more defined, though still not ideal. I hesitated, unsure which way to go. I could backtrack, but I didn't want to go back the way I'd come. Something about that direction felt wrong now. I took the path to the right, hoping it would lead me out of this forest soon. The trail seemed to climb now, and I found myself moving up a steep incline, my legs burning with effort. It wasn't long before I started noticing odd things. Small, random things that didn't make sense. A stick in the middle of the path, perfectly placed in a way that didn't seem natural. A tree with its bark peeled off in a straight line, as if something or someone had deliberately scraped it away. A broken branch, bent unnaturally, as though someone had been there recently. It was getting darker, and the shadows were thickening around me. My breath came in quick bursts as I picked up the pace, nearly jogging up the trail now. I had to get out of here. I had to keep moving. Then, just as the darkness truly began to set in, I saw it. A small figure, standing just off the trail, hidden behind a cluster of thick trees. It was too far away to make out any details, but I could make out a shape, someone standing there motionless. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was just standing. My stomach dropped. I froze. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the shadowy figure, but eventually, something inside me snapped. I turned and ran. My legs were burning from the exertion, and my breath was ragged as I sprinted down the trail. I had no idea if the figure was still there or if it was just my imagination, but I didn't care. All that mattered was getting out of the woods. I ran until my lungs felt like they were going to explode, until my legs threatened to give out beneath me. The world around me blurred as I stumbled forward, not even paying attention to where I was going, just needing to get away. When I finally burst out of the woods, my heart was hammering in my chest, and the cold night air felt like a shock to my system. I had made it. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I was out of the woods, and whatever had been following me was no longer my problem. I don't know if what I saw was real, or if I had simply lost my grip on reality in the isolation of the forest. Maybe I had been pushing myself too hard, or maybe the forest had just gotten to me. But I don't care. I'm not going back there. Not ever. Some things aren't meant to be figured out, and some woods should just be left alone. I was looking forward to this hike. There's something about nature that always calms me. Long stretches of forest, the crunch of leaves underfoot, and the freedom of just being alone with your thoughts. This trail, a moderately difficult one, was supposed to take me through some of the most scenic parts of the area. I'd read about it in hiking forums and seen pictures of the towering trees and sprawling views. It seemed perfect for a weekend trip. Just me, my pack, and the open trail. It was an early Saturday morning when I set out. The sun had barely risen, casting soft rays over the distant peaks. I was used to getting up early for hikes. It's when the air is freshest and the trail the least crowded. My backpack felt light, though I had packed all the essentials: water, snacks, a first aid kit, and a map. I always made sure to be prepared, even for unexpected situations. The weather was perfect, clear skies and mild temperatures. Nothing about the morning seemed off. The path started wide and smooth, winding through an area of thick trees. The air smelled earthy, rich with the scent of pine and damp soil. Birds chirped above, and every now and then, I'd hear a rustling in the underbrush. Likely squirrels or deer, nothing out of the ordinary. I walked at a steady pace, enjoying the solitude and the slow immersion into the forest. As I made my way deeper into the woods, the trail began to narrow. The trees grew taller and the forest denser. It felt quieter here, as if the world outside had fallen away. The only sounds were the occasional creak of a branch and my footsteps crunching along the gravel. I looked at the map on my phone. There was a fork coming up in about half a mile. It would be my first real decision of the hike, and I'd already decided I was going to take the less traveled path. Something about it called to me. It wasn't a difficult route, but fewer people seemed to take it, and that made it more appealing. I preferred quiet, peaceful hikes over the more popular routes that were often crowded with groups. When I reached the fork, I followed the smaller path, which veered off to the right. Almost immediately, the trail became steeper. The trees grew thicker, blocking out more of the sunlight, and the ground was covered in loose rocks and fallen leaves. The climb wasn't hard, but it was a bit of a workout. Sweat began to bead on my forehead as I pushed onward. The higher I went, the more the trail seemed to wind around the mountain, and the deeper I ventured into the woods. About an hour later, I stopped for a quick break. I sat on a large rock, sipping water and catching my breath. My phone showed no signal, no surprise, considering how far off the beaten path I had gone. I didn't mind, though. The isolation felt comforting. It was only then that I realized how silent everything had become. Normally, on a hike like this, you'd hear the occasional breeze rustling through the leaves, or maybe an animal moving through the underbrush. But now it was eerily quiet. I looked around, scanning the trees, but there was nothing. No movement, no noise, just stillness. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just part of the deep forest atmosphere. I stood up, stretched, and continued walking. The trail began to get rougher as I ascended, and I had to pay more attention to where I was stepping. I was still in good spirits, enjoying the challenge. The climb became steeper, and soon, I was scrambling over loose rocks, using tree roots to pull myself up. There was a part of me that wondered if I should have stuck to the main trail, but I pushed those thoughts away. This was what I'd come for, this sense of raw adventure. After another hour or so, I noticed something strange. I wasn't sure what it was at first. It was a shift in the air, something subtle, but enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I stopped, looking around. The forest was still as silent as before, but now there was a strange feeling that I wasn't alone. It was a subtle unease, a whisper of something just beyond my sight. I shook it off again, trying to focus on the trail ahead, but the feeling lingered. I continued upward, the incline becoming more challenging. My legs burned with effort, but I was determined to make it to the top. The higher I got, the harder it was to see the trail clearly. It had become a jumble of loose rocks, tree roots, and thick underbrush. The canopy above had thickened, blocking out more light, and soon, the trail became little more than a faint path through the forest. I checked my map, unsure if I was still on the right track. It was hard to tell. I was so far into the wilderness now that the landmarks I had hoped to rely on had disappeared. At some point, the trail seemed to fade completely. I stopped again, trying to get my bearings. My heart was beating a little faster now, not from exertion, but from something else. I glanced around and realized that the silence had deepened. The air felt thick, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. I decided to retrace my steps, thinking I had missed a turn or wandered off course. As I backtracked, the feeling of being watched intensified. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the trees made me pause and look around. but I saw nothing. My mind raced with thoughts. Was it just my nerves? Or was something out there? Maybe I was just being paranoid. Still, the unease wouldn't leave me. I pushed forward more cautiously now. It wasn't until much later that I realized I had lost track of time. The sun was low, and the light was fading fast. I hadn't made it back to the fork I'd passed earlier. Something wasn't right. The woods were eerily still, and my phone had been dead for a while now. I had no way of calling for help, no way to orient myself. Panic set in slowly. I tried to focus on the trail, looking for any familiar signs, but everything felt foreign. The trees, the rocks, the path, nothing looked the same as before. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I knew it was easy to get disoriented in the woods, especially when you're this far off the main trail. I could still hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I walked faster now, hoping to stumble across a clearing or some sign of civilization. But then, as I rounded a corner, I froze. Ahead of me, just at the edge of the trees, there was a figure. It was tall, thin, and completely still. Couldn't make out any details. My breath caught in my throat, and I stood frozen in place, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Could have been a tree or just the light playing tricks, but it didn't move. It was as if it were waiting. For what felt like forever, I just stared, too afraid to move. Then the figure took a slow step forward. I gasped and stepped back, heart racing. I was alone. There was no one else out here. I turned quickly, scrambling to get back to where I thought the trail had been, but I wasn't sure anymore. Every direction looked the same. My mind raced, thoughts swirling in a panic. The sun was almost gone now, and darkness was setting in. That was when I heard the voice. Faint, distant, and barely audible, but it was definitely there. "Hey!" I spun around, but saw nothing. My chest tightened. I wasn't sure what to do. I needed to get out of here. I turned back to the path and ran, slipping on rocks and roots. I didn't look back. My breath was ragged, and the fear was overwhelming. My heart thudded in my chest as I forced myself forward. It felt like hours before I finally stumbled back into the clearing where the fork had been. My legs were shaky, and I collapsed onto a nearby rock, gasping for air. I couldn't hear anything now. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. The oppressive feeling was gone. I checked my watch. Just over 3 hours had passed since I had started this whole ordeal. Somehow, I had been lost for hours when it felt like minutes. The hike out was uneventful. The forest seemed ordinary again, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. It was the longest hike I'd ever taken, and I couldn't explain what had happened or why I'd gotten lost. I didn't want to dwell on it, but when I finally reached the parking lot, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. I was safe back where I belonged. It wasn't until later, as I was looking through the photos I had taken during the hike, that I noticed something strange in one of the pictures. A shadow in the background, just behind a tree, where no one had been when I took it. It made my blood run cold. I deleted the photo immediately. Some things were better left unexplained. I've always loved hiking. The quiet, the solitude, the fresh air. It's the perfect way to escape everything. And so, on this particular autumn morning, I found myself alone on the South Ridge Trail, a less traveled path through a dense forest. It was a place I'd hiked before, but never alone. I had my backpack, filled with the usual essentials: water, snacks, a first aid kit, and a map, though I didn't expect to need it. The trail was well marked, even if it wasn't the most popular route. The air was crisp with the scent of damp earth and pine. The trees around me were mostly evergreens, their thick, dark green needles catching the sunlight in streaks, casting long shadows on the path ahead. A few scattered leaves from the maples and oaks were just beginning to turn yellow and orange, but there wasn't enough of a breeze to make them fall just yet. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. I made my way through the first few miles without issue, enjoying the rhythm of my steps crunching on the trail beneath me. Every now and then, I'd stop to take a sip of water or adjust the straps on my backpack. But the deeper I went into the forest, the more isolated everything felt. I hadn't seen another hiker since the trailhead, and the only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant calls of birds. The further I went, the more the feeling of isolation began to gnaw at me. I was used to being alone in nature, but something about this place was different. The trees felt too close, as though they were leaning in, watching. I pushed the thought aside, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. It wasn't until the trail started to get steeper that I began to notice something strange. At first, I thought it was just the uneven ground beneath me, but then I realized there was an odd silence that settled over the forest. The birds had stopped calling, and the usual rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush had ceased. It was as though everything was holding its breath. I paused, standing still for a moment. I wasn't sure if I was hearing things, or if the air itself had changed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. I turned around, half expecting to see another hiker coming up the path behind me, but the trail was empty. It was just me, the trees, and the quiet. Shaking my head, I continued on. I wasn't going to let my imagination get the best of me. After all, it was just a hike, just another day in the woods. I pushed forward, the path narrowing as I ascended further into the hills. Hours seemed to pass, though I couldn't say for sure how long I'd been hiking. My legs were starting to feel the strain, and my water supply was getting low. The trail had become more rugged, with large rocks jutting out of the ground and thick roots twisting up from the earth, making each step more difficult. But I wasn't worried. I dealt with worse on other trails. Then I noticed it, a figure. Far ahead, just beyond a bend in the trail, I could make out a shape, a person, maybe, standing still like they were waiting for something. I paused, watching. They weren't moving. There was no way they could have heard me coming. I'd been making noise with each step, crunching on leaves and snapping twigs underfoot. And yet, this person stood perfectly still, as if they were aware of my presence. It made my skin crawl. I stood there for a long moment, unsure of what to do. Should I approach them? Was it another hiker? But something didn't sit right. I couldn't explain it, but everything about the situation felt wrong. I didn't like the idea of passing them on the narrow trail. The silence was oppressive now, and the air seemed to grow heavier, as though the forest itself had gone still in anticipation. Without thinking, I turned around, heading back the way I'd come. My heart was beating faster now, adrenaline starting to kick in. I didn't know why, but I felt a growing sense of urgency. Maybe it was because I was so deep in the woods and the figure was just standing there. Maybe it was the strange, unnatural silence. Whatever the reason, I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I moved quickly, but the forest didn't make it easy. Every step seemed to take longer than the last, and my legs were beginning to feel like lead. The trail, which had seemed so familiar on the way up, now felt foreign, as though the trees were shifting in place, trying to block my path. The sound of my own breathing was the only thing I could hear now, heavy and uneven. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure following me, but there was nothing, just the dense, quiet woods stretching out behind me. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. But then the crunch of footsteps, just ahead of me, but not my own. I froze, heart racing. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to hear. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of someone moving on the trail ahead of me. I knew I couldn't be imagining it. The footsteps were real, and they were getting closer. I didn't stop to think. My instincts kicked in, and I broke into a sprint, my legs burning with the effort. The trail seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning, but all I could focus on was getting away from the sound of those footsteps, closing in behind me. The forest around me was a blur, the trees becoming indistinct shapes as I moved faster and faster, driven by pure panic. My breath was ragged, my chest tight, but I couldn't stop now. I had no idea who or what was back there, but I didn't want to find out. The trail dipped into a ravine, and I nearly lost my footing, stumbling down the uneven path. I caught myself just before I went tumbling, my heart in my throat. But as I regained my balance, I realized something. The footsteps had stopped. I skidded to a halt, panting heavily, and looked around. The ravine was quiet. The trail ahead of me was empty. The only sounds were my ragged breaths and the distant rustling of leaves in the wind. I didn't know what to make of it. Had I been hearing things? Had I imagined the footsteps? But the feeling of being watched, of being followed, was still there. The oppressive silence returned, and it felt as though the forest itself was holding its breath. I didn't want to stay here any longer. The air felt wrong. The whole forest felt wrong. But I also knew that turning back wasn't an option. I couldn't risk encountering whoever or whatever was out there. I had to keep moving. With renewed determination, I pushed forward. The trail finally began to flatten out, and the trees started to thin. I was almost out of the worst of it. The panic that had gripped me earlier began to ease, but only slightly. My mind was still racing, trying to make sense of what had happened. As I neared the end of the trail, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The woods were still and quiet, and I could see the clearing ahead, the last stretch before the trailhead. I could already hear the distant sound of a creek, a reassuring, familiar noise. I was almost there, but then I saw something that made my blood run cold. The figure from earlier, the one I had seen from afar. They were standing at the edge of the clearing, just out of sight of the trailhead, watching. But this time, they weren't standing still. They were moving toward me. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran, adrenaline surging through me like a tidal wave. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of the trailhead, where I collapsed onto a bench, gasping for air. I had no idea who or what had been out there with me in those woods, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't ever coming back. The day started like any other hiking trip I had taken. I had my backpack packed with the essentials: water, snacks, a first aid kit, a map, and a trusty compass. The weather was perfect for a hike, not too hot or cold, just the right kind of fresh air that made you feel alive. I drove to the trailhead early in the morning before the sun had fully risen, because I liked to get a head start when it came to hiking. The trails weren't too crowded at that hour, and I loved the quietness that came with being one of the first to step into the woods. The trail I was about to take was one I'd hiked before, so I wasn't expecting any surprises. It was a popular route, well-maintained, with markers along the way to keep you on track. I knew it would take me about 4 to 5 hours to complete the loop, depending on how often I stopped to take pictures or rest. Today, though, I wasn't in a hurry. I wasn't planning on making any long stops. I just wanted to clear my mind, get a little exercise, and enjoy the solitude of nature. The first hour passed without incident. The forest was peaceful, the birds chirping above, and the air crisp and clean. The path was wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, but it was narrow enough to make you feel like you were truly immersed in the wilderness. As I walked, I admired the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows and creating patches of warmth on the forest floor. It wasn't long before I noticed something that didn't quite seem right. I had been walking for a while when I came across a part of the trail where the ground was unusually soft. It wasn't muddy, but it felt spongy, like I was walking on moss that had grown too thick. It made me slow down for a moment, paying closer attention to where I was stepping. I had walked this trail before, but I didn't remember this section being like this. The trail was usually hard-packed dirt, nothing like this strange, soft ground. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just a spot that had seen more rain than the others. A few more steps and I noticed something else. Small markings on the trees. They were faint, almost like carvings. At first, I thought they were just the result of weathering or animals, but the more I looked at them, the stranger they seemed. They didn't look like the kind of marks left by nature. They were too deliberate. I wasn't sure what to make of them, but I kept walking. There was no turning back now, and the trail was still wide and clear ahead. As I continued, the forest began to feel different. The sounds changed. The usual chirping of birds began to quiet down, and I could hear the rustling of something in the distance. Not animals, at least not small ones. This sounded like something bigger, maybe even a person. I stopped, trying to listen more carefully, but the noise stopped as suddenly as it had started. For a moment, I convinced myself it was just the wind, or a deer moving through the brush, but something inside me didn't feel quite right. I chalked it up to overactive imagination and kept moving forward. I reached a small creek, which was a natural resting point. I took a drink of water, dipping my hands into the cold stream to cool off. There was something calming about the sound of running water, so I sat by the edge for a few minutes, letting my mind wander. The odd feeling from earlier seemed to fade, but I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. It was a subtle feeling, but it was there, like eyes on the back of my neck. I looked around, scanning the trees and rocks, but everything seemed still, silent even. There was no movement at all, and yet the feeling lingered. I stood up, brushing off the unease, and continued along the trail. The path started to climb now, becoming steeper as I neared the ridge. The trees here were taller, their roots twisting in odd patterns along the ground, and the air grew cooler as I gained elevation. The trail narrowed, and I had to pay more attention to where I was stepping, trying to avoid the exposed rocks and uneven ground. It wasn't a difficult hike, but the change in terrain made me more aware of my surroundings. That's when I heard it, a rustling noise again, much closer this time. My heart skipped a beat. I froze in place, listening. There was definitely something moving through the brush, and it wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate, too close. I couldn't see anything, but the noise was unmistakable. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I called out, "Hello!" The words felt weak as they left my mouth, but there was no answer. No response at all, except for the faint crackling of dry leaves underfoot. I waited for a moment, holding my breath, but nothing else came. My logical side told me it was probably just another hiker, but the part of me that couldn't shake the feeling of being watched told me otherwise. I decided to keep moving, but my pace quickened. The trail turned into a series of switchbacks, leading up to a rocky outcrop with a clear view of the valley below. From here, I could see the entire forest stretching out, the trees thick and endless in every direction. I stopped for a moment to take in the view, my nerves still a little on edge. I wasn't sure why I felt so unsettled, but the thought of heading back to the car suddenly seemed like a good idea. But I was already this far into the hike. Turning back now would feel like giving in to something that I couldn't even name. So I pressed on. The next hour felt longer than it should have. The trail seemed to twist and turn endlessly, the rocky ground beneath my boots becoming more treacherous. I was focused on the path now, my thoughts drifting in and out of my head. My legs were starting to feel the strain of the climb, but I was close to the summit. I told myself it would be worth it once I reached the top. And then, out of nowhere, I heard it, a loud, unmistakable snap of a branch behind me. It was a sharp sound, like someone had stepped on a twig. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing, just the dense forest and the distant hum of the wind. No person, no animal, just empty space. I shook my head, muttering to myself about being jumpy. I was probably just tired, I told myself. But the feeling of being watched was stronger now, more persistent. It was as if something or someone was just out of sight, always keeping pace with me. I pushed on, trying to ignore the growing sense of urgency in my chest. The summit was just ahead, and I could hear the sound of birds calling from up high, the promise of a beautiful view. I finally reached the top and took a deep breath, looking out over the valley below. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, the shadows playing strange games with the trees. But as my eyes focused, I saw it clearly. A figure standing just on the edge of the forest, partially hidden behind a large boulder. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. His clothes were dark, blending with the shadows, and he stood perfectly still, not moving at all. I couldn't make out his face, but I could feel his eyes on me, cold and unwavering. I didn't know what to do. I stood there, frozen, unsure of whether I should call out or turn and run. My heart was pounding in my chest, and the air felt thick, heavy. For what felt like an eternity, we just stared at each other. Finally, the figure moved, stepping back into the forest, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. I didn't wait around to figure out what was going on. I turned and bolted down the trail, not caring about the rocky path or my aching legs. I didn't stop to look back, didn't dare. I just ran, my breath coming in sharp gasps, my feet slipping on the uneven terrain as I tried to put as much distance between myself and that figure as possible. It felt like hours before I finally reached the bottom of the trail, but it was probably only a few minutes. I was exhausted, out of breath, and scared, but the trailhead was in sight. The car was just ahead, and I could hear the hum of the engine as it started up in my mind. When I finally stepped into the parking lot and turned back toward the forest, I was alone. There was no one there. I don't know what I saw that day. Maybe it was a hiker who had wandered too far off the trail, or maybe it was something else entirely. I'll never know. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out there in those woods, and I didn't ever want to go back. It was the kind of day that made me want to disappear into the woods. The sun was sinking, but not quickly enough. A cool breeze stirred the leaves as I stood at the trailhead, the sound of rustling foliage filling the air. There was something calming about it, like nature's own version of a lullaby. The towering pines stood proud and silent around me, their trunks covered in thick moss, their limbs stretching up toward the sky. I had come here alone, a weekend getaway from the noise of the world. The trail had been marked as moderate, a perfect balance for what I was looking for. Nothing too intense, just a few hours to clear my mind. I should have known better. The hike began with ease. The trail was well worn, though it had a slightly overgrown feel to it. The path was narrow, winding around thick trees that arched overhead. The smell of pine needles and fresh earth was intoxicating, and the air had a crispness that made me breathe deeper with every step. Birds sang from the branches above, and the occasional rustle of small animals, squirrels probably, kept my senses alert, though it was more out of habit than anything else. The first hour went by smoothly. I was already far from the parking area, with no sign of any other hikers. The trail felt peaceful, almost comforting. I told myself I was being paranoid when I noticed the silence growing. The birds had stopped chirping, and the soft sounds of the wind rustling through the trees seemed to die down. It wasn't a complete absence of sound. There was still the occasional snap of a branch, but it felt different, more pronounced. I kept moving, thinking it was just me letting my mind wander. I was used to the stillness of nature, and I'd hiked alone plenty of times before. But something felt off that day, as if I was being watched, although I never saw anything. After a couple more hours, I began to notice the trail was becoming less maintained. The path was getting steeper and the vegetation more dense. The occasional rock formation jutted out from the earth, and the trees grew closer together, blocking out more light. I didn't think much of it at first. I had read a little about the trail online, and some parts were marked as a bit rugged. Still, my stomach began to tighten with a sense of unease, something that felt more primal than rational. I came across a fork in the trail. One path seemed to veer off to the right, toward a hill where the trees opened up, and the other led further down into the dense woods. The right path looked more like a shortcut, so I decided to take it, thinking I could get to a scenic viewpoint faster. I was wrong. The moment I stepped onto the alternate trail, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt heavier, as if the trees were pressing in on me. The distant chirping of birds was replaced by an unsettling silence, and I began to notice how still everything was. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the lack of movement. Even the wind seemed to have vanished. The air around me felt suffocating, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I pushed on, convincing myself it was all in my head. The trail narrowed further, and the trees closed in even tighter. The dense thicket of bushes and brambles made it harder to move through, and the light was barely filtering through the canopy now. I checked my phone for a signal, but it was dead. The battery had drained faster than I expected. I thought about turning back, but it was too late for that. I was already deeper than I had planned, and that's when I heard it, the faintest sound, like a soft shuffle in the underbrush. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But then the noise came again, closer this time. It wasn't a normal rustling. It was deliberate, as if someone or something was moving just out of sight. My heart rate picked up. I stopped in my tracks, trying to listen carefully. The world seemed to be holding its breath again, but this time, I wasn't alone. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound, but there was no clear direction, just a creeping sensation that someone or something was following me. I turned quickly, half expecting to see another hiker, but there was nothing behind me. The forest remained still, eerily so. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that it was just the forest playing tricks on me. But the feeling of being watched didn't subside. In fact, it intensified. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder every few steps. The trail ahead became more difficult to navigate, and the trees grew denser. The path began to wind in unnatural directions, as though the forest was deliberately pulling me off course. Then, just as I thought the path couldn't get any worse, it opened up into a small clearing. But it wasn't the relief I expected. Felt wrong, too wrong. The ground was soft, like the earth had been recently disturbed. The trees around the clearing were twisted and gnarled, their bark blackened as if scorched by fire. But there were no signs of fire, no ash, just blackened trees and a strange, heavy smell in the air. I stepped forward, the eerie silence hanging like a shroud over the space. And then I saw it, pile of rocks, a cairn, not unlike the ones hikers usually stack along the trail to mark their way. But this one was different. It wasn't a neatly stacked pile of stones. It was haphazard, as if it had been thrown together in a hurry. And sitting on top of the rocks was a single red ribbon, tied tightly around one of the stones. It was frayed at the edges, as if it had been there for far too long. I stared at it for a moment, a shiver crawling up my spine. That ribbon, it didn't belong here. I was out in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest trailhead, and yet there it was, as if someone or something had deliberately placed it there. I backed away slowly, suddenly feeling the weight of the forest pressing in around me. The air grew colder, and the stillness felt oppressive. The sounds that had been absent before were now filling my ears. A faint creaking, a distant snap of a branch, the softest of footsteps behind me. My breath quickened, and I found myself glancing back over my shoulder more and more often. I couldn't stay there. I needed to get out. Turning on my heel, I began to retrace my steps, my eyes darting around as if expecting something, or someone, to emerge from the trees. I felt foolish for not having turned back sooner, but it was too late. I had wandered too far, and now the forest seemed to have swallowed me whole. I kept walking, though I had no idea where the trail was anymore. Every turn seemed to lead me deeper into the woods, further from the direction I had come from. The sunlight was fading, the shadows stretching longer with each passing minute. Panic started to rise in my chest. I was lost and I was alone. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I saw it, a figure standing in the distance. At first, I thought it was a tree, or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But no, as I blinked, the figure became clearer. It was a person, a man. His back was turned to me, and he was standing still, unmoving, in the middle of the trail. I called out, but he didn't respond. I took a cautious step forward, then another. But the moment I moved, the man turned and disappeared into the trees, vanishing like smoke. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. That wasn't normal. No one else had been on the trail all day. I hadn't seen a single hiker since I'd left the parking lot. I didn't dare move. I stayed as still as I could, listening. The forest had gone completely silent again. I waited for what felt like hours, but nothing happened. No more footsteps, no more figures, just the oppressive quiet. Finally, I gathered the courage to move. I retraced my steps, faster now, my senses on high alert. My mind was racing, but my body was mechanical, moving without thinking. After what felt like an eternity, I finally found the main trail again. It wasn't much of a relief, though, because the sun had nearly set, and the darkness was closing in. I followed the main trail until I saw the parking area in the distance. My car still there, waiting for me. The moment I reached it, I slammed the door behind me, locking it quickly. I didn't look back. The drive home was a blur. I don't know if I was more relieved to leave the woods or if I was just too exhausted to care. And yet, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling that the forest didn't want me to leave. Something was out there watching me, something that didn't want me to find my way back. And now, even in the safety of my home, I keep seeing that red ribbon in my mind, fluttering on the rocks. It was a warning, one I didn't understand until it was too late. I don't know what I stumbled upon that day, but I will never set foot on that trail again. I never should have gone on that hike alone. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend. Just me, my boots, and the mountains. I had been planning it for weeks, thinking that some solitude in the wild would be the perfect escape from the stress of work and city life. I chose a trail that wasn't too well known, the kind of place where you could feel like you were the only person on earth, the perfect way to recharge. The morning I left, the weather was clear, a bit chilly, but nothing out of the ordinary. The trailhead was just off the main road, and as I parked my car, I was met with the usual mix of excitement and nervousness that comes with starting something new. I checked my pack one more time, making sure I had everything: water, snacks, a first aid kit, a map. I knew the trail, at least the general layout of it, so I didn't expect to get lost. Still, I always like to be prepared. I locked the car and set off, breathing in the fresh, crisp air. The trail started out easy, winding through thick trees, their leaves already starting to turn amber for the fall. The air smelled earthy, like damp soil and pine. The only sounds were my footsteps crunching on the gravel path and the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. The first few miles were nothing unusual. The trail dipped down into a small valley, following a creek that twisted through the trees. It was quiet, with just the sound of water flowing over rocks and the occasional bird call overhead. I stopped a few times to take pictures, admiring the landscape, but each time I looked around, something seemed off. The woods felt dense, too dense. The trees crowded in on me, their gnarled branches reaching out as if trying to grab me. I shrugged it off, though. It was just my imagination, I thought. About halfway through the hike, the trail became steeper, leading up toward a rocky ridge. I had read that the view from the top was breathtaking, and that's what kept me going. My legs were starting to feel the burn, but I welcomed the physical challenge. I was in good shape, and this was exactly what I needed to clear my head. That's when I noticed something strange. I'd been walking for hours, and the trail was starting to feel unfamiliar. The path was narrowing, becoming more overgrown. The usual trail markers were sparse, and I started to wonder if I had missed a turn somewhere. I checked my map, but it didn't seem to match up with what I was seeing. The contours of the land were wrong. I couldn't figure it out. I stood there for a moment trying to get my bearings. The air around me seemed to grow heavier, the sounds of nature dimming as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I decided to press on, hoping the trail would open up again. But it didn't. It just got worse. The path became more and more difficult to follow, the ground uneven and slippery from the morning dew. I found myself scrambling over rocks and fallen branches, my heart rate picking up as the trail seemed to disappear entirely. At this point, I started to feel genuinely uneasy. It was as if the forest had closed in around me, trapping me in a maze with no way out. I should have turned back then. The thought crossed my mind, but something kept me going. Maybe it was the idea of the view at the top, maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe I just didn't want to admit that I had gotten myself into a situation I couldn't handle. I kept moving, pushing through the underbrush and ignoring the creeping sense of dread building in the pit of my stomach. The further I went, the more I felt like I was being watched. The trees seemed to loom over me, their twisted branches casting long, eerie shadows in the fading light. The air was thick, almost suffocating. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion anymore. There was something else, something wrong. Eventually, I found myself standing in front of a cliff, the rocks jutting out sharply toward the sky. It was a view, but not the one I had been expecting. The mountain peak was still out of reach, and the dense forest stretched endlessly behind me. The silence was oppressive, and it was as though the entire world had stopped. I looked around, trying to get a sense of where I was, but everything seemed unfamiliar. That's when I realized I had made a mistake. I'd taken the wrong path. Somehow, I had wandered off the main trail into an area that was rarely visited. I had no idea how far I had gone or where I was in relation to the trailhead. My phone had no signal, of course. I felt a wave of panic rush over me. This wasn't just a missed turn or a minor detour. I was lost, and worse, I was alone. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting everything in a cold, golden light. The woods felt different in the fading light, darker, more threatening. I knew I had to get out of there before it got completely dark, but the thought of retracing my steps felt impossible. The trail was barely visible now, and with every step I took, the dense forest seemed to swallow me whole. I started moving again, hoping to find some sign of the trail or any recognizable landmarks. But the more I walked, the more disoriented I became. I tried to remember my surroundings, any distinctive features of the landscape that might help me find my way back, but everything looked the same. Trees, rocks, more trees. Nothing stood out. I began to feel the weight of panic rising in my chest. My heart was pounding in my ears. I couldn't keep moving like this. I needed to stop and think. I found a small clearing and sat down on a rock, trying to steady my breathing. I pulled out my map again, but it was useless. I couldn't make sense of it anymore. It was as if the landscape itself had shifted, become something I didn't recognize. As the light faded, the forest grew darker, the shadows lengthening. The temperature dropped rapidly, and the chill of the night air sank into my bones. I realized I had to make a decision. Stay put and hope someone would come looking for me, or keep moving and risk getting even more lost. I opted for the latter. Felt like my only option. I picked a direction and forced myself to walk. The darkness pressed in on me like a weight, and I stumbled over roots and rocks in the growing gloom. Every crack of a twig, every rustle in the bushes made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It wasn't a ghost or some supernatural presence. It was just the primal instinct that tells you when you're being watched. Couldn't explain it, but I felt it deeply. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I saw it. A light. It was faint at first, just a small glow in the distance, but it was enough to give me hope. I hurried toward it, my legs burning, my breath shallow and fast. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a campfire or someone else's flashlight. It was the last remnants of daylight, barely visible through a break in the trees. And just beyond that break, I saw the trail. A small sign, barely visible in the dim light, marked the turnoff to the main trail. I followed it without hesitation, my legs shaky but driven by the overwhelming need to get out of the woods. I kept my focus on the trail, ignoring the growing darkness around me, until finally, after what felt like hours, I made it back to the main path. Relief flooded through me, so intense that it almost brought me to my knees. I looked around, the familiar trees and rocks no longer feeling ominous but like old friends. I knew exactly where I was now. The end of the trail was just a few miles away. By the time I reached the trailhead, the stars were out, and the night air was crisp and cool. My car was waiting for me, a beacon of safety. I didn't hesitate. I didn't look back. I just got in, started the engine, and drove off without another thought. I don't know what exactly happened out there, but I know I'll never go hiking alone again. It was a harsh reminder of how quickly things can go wrong, how easily you can become lost in a place that's supposed to be peaceful. That forest isn't some tranquil escape. It's a place that can swallow you whole if you're not careful. And as I drove away, one thought kept repeating in my head. I was lucky. Next time, I might not be. It was just supposed to be another quiet day on the trail. I had been hiking for years, spent countless weekends escaping into the woods, walking along dusty paths, through overgrown forests, or across rocky ridgelines. But that day, something was different, and I didn't realize how much it would change me. I left the house early, packing light. It was a Saturday, and I figured it would be a nice escape from the usual chaos of life. The weather was perfect, clear skies, crisp air, the kind of day that made you want to be outside. I drove out to the trailhead, the one that took you up to the old mountain peak. It wasn't particularly famous, not like some of the bigger mountains or national parks, but that was the charm. Fewer people. It was the kind of place where you could truly be alone. I started the hike around 8 a.m., my boots crunching the gravel on the path as I made my way into the trees. The first few miles were easy, the trail winding gently upward, just a slight incline. Birds chirped, the sun filtered through the leaves, and the sounds of the forest felt like a familiar soundtrack to my thoughts. I always enjoyed the solitude, the rhythm of your steps, the quiet of nature, and the sense of accomplishment as you climbed higher. But after a few hours, I started to notice something odd. It was subtle at first. The forest around me had begun to feel unusually quiet. The birds had stopped chirping. The wind no longer rustled the leaves. Even the sounds of small animals scampering through the underbrush were gone. I didn't think too much of it. Sometimes the weather could shift unexpectedly, or maybe I was just in a quieter part of the forest. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I continued up the trail, the path began to narrow, and the trees grew thicker. The canopy overhead blocked out more of the light, and soon, it felt like I was walking through a tunnel of green. I paused for a moment, looking around. There was no one else on the trail. That wasn't unusual. I'd often hiked for hours without seeing a soul, but today the silence seemed heavier. The sense of unease grew, and I pushed it down, telling myself I was overthinking it. But the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, as if I was being watched. I tried to shrug it off, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. Then came the first sign that something was wrong. I rounded a corner, and there, lying across the trail, was a large rock. Not out of place in itself. Rocks fall from cliffs all the time, but the way it was positioned caught my attention. It wasn't like it had naturally fallen there. It was almost as if someone had placed it deliberately, like a barrier. I could have climbed over it easily, but it still stopped me. I hesitated for a moment, inspecting the rock, but then decided to move past it. Maybe it was just a fluke. The deeper I went, the more I realized the trail had changed. The path became steeper, more rugged. The trees grew closer, blocking out more sunlight. The feeling of being watched intensified. I paused again, but this time, I felt a real chill run down my spine. There was no wind, no sound of animals, not even the occasional distant rustle of leaves. It was as if the entire forest had gone still. I kept going. I had no choice but to move forward. The trail wasn't hard to follow. There were markers every so often, bright orange dots on the trees, guiding the way. But the markers were beginning to feel more like warnings. Then, just as I reached a particularly steep part of the trail, I saw something strange. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow in the trees. But when I looked closer, I realized it was a figure. Someone standing motionless just off the path, half hidden behind a thick cluster of bushes. My heart skipped. I couldn't make out any details, just a vague silhouette. Maybe it was another hiker, I thought, but there was no movement, no sign of anyone else. The figure didn't shift or turn, didn't seem to notice me at all. It was just standing there, still and silent. I cleared my throat, unsure what to do. But as soon as I took a step forward, the figure disappeared into the underbrush, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. I was left standing there, staring at the spot where it had been. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I stood frozen, unsure of whether I should keep going or turn back. But the idea of heading back felt just as unsettling. So I continued, heart pounding in my chest. My steps were quick now, almost frantic as I ascended higher. The air felt colder, sharper, and the unease was gnawing at my insides. Eventually, I reached a clearing at the top of the ridge. The view was breathtaking. Far below, the valley stretched out, dotted with small villages and farms. The sun was high in the sky now, but the forest around me felt suffocating, as if the trees were closing in. I took a deep breath, trying to shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I pulled out my water bottle and sat on a rock to rest, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. The silence here was different. It wasn't the usual quiet of nature, but a heavy, oppressive silence. It was as if the whole world had stopped, holding its breath. That's when I heard it. A noise, a faint crunching sound, like someone stepping on twigs, coming from behind me. I whipped my head around, but there was nothing, just the dense trees and the shadows between them. No one was there. My heart raced. I was alone, I told myself. There was no one else here. But the sound continued, faint but unmistakable. Panic started to set in. I was too far from the trailhead to go back without a serious effort. And if someone or something was following me, I didn't know how to get away. I grabbed my pack, my muscles tensed, and I slowly stood, trying not to make a sound. The crunching stopped for a moment, and for a brief second, I thought maybe it had been my imagination. But then, I heard it again, closer this time. I spun around, my eyes darting through the trees, searching for any sign of movement. The world felt too still, too silent. Every instinct in my body screamed that I wasn't alone. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on the trees, my heart racing in my chest. The noise stopped, but the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I didn't know if it was an animal or something else, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I started to run. My legs burned with the effort, but I couldn't stop. Every crunch of leaves beneath my feet felt like it was too loud, too obvious. The path was steep now, and the ground was uneven. My foot caught on a root, and I stumbled, nearly falling face first into the dirt. My breath was shallow, my mind racing, but I forced myself to keep moving. I ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I saw the familiar markers that led back toward the trailhead. The forest was thick, and the trail was harder to follow as I descended, but I kept going. Couldn't stop. Something was behind me, of that I was sure. When I finally reached the trailhead, I nearly collapsed, my body trembling with adrenaline. I looked around, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me, but there was no one. I was alone, but I would never forget that feeling. The sensation that something was out there with me, following me, waiting. I had no idea what it was, but I wasn't going back to that trail anytime soon. And as I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder, was I the only one who had ever felt it? Or was there something else out there, hiding just beyond the trees, waiting for the next person to walk the trail? I didn't know, but I wasn't willing to find out. I was always a fan of the outdoors. Growing up in a small town surrounded by thick forests and winding trails, hiking was just part of life. Weekends meant a trip into the woods, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone. I enjoyed the quiet, the solitude, the peaceful rhythm of walking through nature. But that day, that one fateful day, changed everything for me. It started like any other hike. I had decided to explore a trail I hadn't taken before, one that was listed as moderate but had a reputation for being a bit more isolated. It was early morning when I left my car, the air cool and crisp, the sun just beginning to filter through the trees. The trailhead was empty, which I liked. Being alone in the woods always gave me a sense of freedom, like I had the whole world to myself. The path started off easy enough. A narrow dirt trail with tall pines on either side. I could hear birds overhead, their calls echoing through the air. The ground was soft beneath my boots, the dirt damp from the dew that hadn't yet evaporated. I took a deep breath, enjoying the smell of pine needles and fresh earth. There was something calming about it, something that made all the stresses of life feel far away. But as I walked deeper into the woods, the atmosphere started to shift. The trees grew taller, their trunks thicker, blocking out more of the sunlight. The forest became quieter. No more birds, no more insects. It was just the sound of my boots crunching on the dirt and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was the kind of silence that was almost too loud, like the forest was holding its breath. I pressed on, not thinking much of it. Maybe I was just being overly cautious. I had hiked in much denser forests before, and I knew that these shifts in the environment were normal. But as I walked, I noticed something odd. The trail was changing. It wasn't as well defined as it had been at the start. The edges were growing more uneven, with roots and rocks jutting out in strange directions. The ground was uneven, sloping down in places and up in others. Still, I pushed forward. I wasn't new to hiking, and a little bit of rough terrain wasn't going to stop me. But as I continued, the sense of unease began to grow. There was something off about the trail. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was being drawn away from the path, like the forest itself was pulling me further in. I kept checking my map, but the trail didn't seem to match anything on the map anymore. The lines weren't right, and the landmarks didn't match. It wasn't like I was lost, per se, but it felt like the trail was slipping away from me. The air had grown heavier too, thicker, with a strange stillness. The usual sounds of nature, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, the buzzing of insects were gone. All I could hear was my own breath and the distant creaking of tree branches. It wasn't long before I noticed something that really made me uneasy. There were no animal tracks. The ground was soft, and the trail should have had signs of wildlife. Prints from deer, small mammals, or even the occasional larger predator. But there was nothing. It was as if all the animals had simply disappeared. I shook my head, trying to push away the feeling. I was being paranoid, I told myself. It was just a remote part of the woods, maybe animals were just further away. But that didn't explain the feeling in the pit of my stomach, that sense of something being wrong. I stopped for a moment, taking a drink of water and trying to steady my nerves. The stillness was almost oppressive, and I realized I hadn't seen any other hikers either. The trail, which I'd been told was somewhat popular, was entirely empty. That's when I heard it. A noise, faint at first, but unmistakable. The sound of footsteps, heavy ones, crunching leaves and twigs underfoot. But the thing that made me freeze was how they were timed, almost like someone was walking just a few steps behind me, matching my pace. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. No one. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe an animal. Maybe my mind playing tricks. But the sound continued, following me, perfectly synchronized with my own movements. The longer I listened, the more it unnerved me. There was something deliberate about it, like whoever, whatever, was behind me was waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. I sped up. The footsteps did the same. At that point, I was no longer walking. I was hiking in a panic, my breathing quick and shallow. I glanced behind me every few seconds, but there was nothing there. Just the same dense forest, the same shifting shadows under the canopy. But the steps were still there, just out of sight. My heart raced, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back. I had to get out of there. But which direction was out? Was I just spiraling deeper into the woods? I couldn't even remember which way the trailhead was. The more I thought about it, the worse it got. My mind was spiraling. I didn't have a cell signal. I hadn't seen any signs of civilization for hours. If something happened, no one would find me. I was alone, completely alone. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the footsteps were getting closer. My mind kept imagining things. Shadows darting just out of the corner of my eye, the wind picking up and making the trees groan like they were whispering. I was losing it, I thought. I was letting my nerves get the best of me. Then, I heard a loud snap of a branch. It wasn't behind me, it was ahead. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. The noise came again, louder this time. Someone or something was moving through the forest ahead of me, and it was coming straight toward me. I didn't even know where to go. The trail split ahead, but I didn't know which way to turn. I was caught in the middle of this thick, oppressive forest with no idea where to go or what to do. The footsteps behind me stopped. They were gone, but I didn't feel any safer. My mind raced. Should I stay put? Run? I couldn't think clearly anymore. I just needed to get out. With no clear plan, I ran. I didn't care if I was headed the wrong way. I couldn't think. I just needed to move, needed to escape whatever it was that was following me. I ran and ran, through the trees, over rocks, down the uneven path, until my legs felt like they were going to give out. That's when I saw it. The trailhead. Couldn't believe it, but there it was. The wide, open space where the trees parted, leading out of the forest and back to where I had parked. My heart was pounding, my breath ragged, but I was almost there, just a few more steps. And then, just as I reached the edge of the woods, I heard a voice, soft, distant, but unmistakable. It was the sound of someone calling my name, but it wasn't anyone I knew. It was just wrong. I turned to look, but there was nothing. The forest was still. The steps had stopped. It was over. I was out. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I didn't care if people thought I was crazy. I slammed the door behind me, locked it, and sat there for a long time, just breathing. I never hiked that trail again, and I never went back into that part of the woods. Whatever had been following me out there, whatever had made the ground so still and the air so thick, was something I'd never be able to explain. But the one thing I know for sure, there are places in the world where things just don't feel right, and sometimes it's best to trust that feeling and leave before it's too late. The plan had been simple enough, just a day trip to the mountains. I'd heard about a trail that went deep into the woods, past a couple of rivers and under cliffs, and I figured it would be the perfect escape. I needed a break from the usual grind of work and city life. So early that morning, I packed my backpack with essentials: water, a sandwich, a couple of energy bars, and my trusty map. No need to overthink it. I wasn't trying to summit any peaks. Just get out, breathe the fresh air, and enjoy the serenity of nature. The drive to the trailhead was calm, the winding roads leading me deeper into unfamiliar territory. The car radio played some background music, but mostly I enjoyed the silence. The farther I went, the fewer cars I saw, the quieter the world became. By the time I reached the trailhead, there was no one else around. It was just me and the wilderness. Perfect. I put on my boots, double-checked my pack, and started walking. The air was cool, still crisp with the early morning chill, and the trees around me were tall and thick, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze. The trail was well marked at first, a dirt path that wound its way around some boulders and over small streams. I could hear birds calling in the distance, the sound of water running nearby, and the occasional rustle of leaves as small animals moved through the underbrush. For the first hour, everything felt peaceful. The world was quiet, and I could almost feel the weight of all my worries lifting with each step. I paused for a while near a creek to take a sip of water, watching the water rush over smooth stones. It was so calm. No rush, no noise, just the natural rhythm of things. But then, something changed. It was subtle at first. I'd walked a little deeper into the forest, following the winding trail, when I started noticing how much quieter everything had become. The birds weren't chirping as loudly, and the rustling in the trees seemed to have stopped. The only sounds I could hear now were my own footsteps, crunching against the dry leaves and pine needles. I shrugged it off. Could just be the way the wind was blowing today. Maybe the animals had moved deeper into the forest, or maybe it was just a quiet day. Nature had its rhythms, and sometimes it liked to be still. But the stillness seemed to stretch longer than I expected, and the air around me grew heavier. I felt like I was being watched. It was a strange sensation, not quite fear, but the kind of discomfort that makes you second-guess the ordinary things you usually ignore. It was like I could feel eyes on my back, even though I was alone. I turned around quickly, scanning the trees, but nothing moved. Still, that gnawing feeling didn't go away. I kept walking. The trail was more rugged now, the path narrowing and curving between thick tree trunks and over uneven ground. There was a small, clear stream running beside the trail, its sound distracting me from the unease growing in my chest. The feeling of being watched kept lingering. Each time I slowed down to drink or rest for a second, I would get this nagging itch at the back of my neck, urging me to keep moving. And so I did. The sunlight began to fade a little as the trees grew denser, casting long shadows across the path. The temperature dropped slightly, and the forest seemed to close in around me. The sense of solitude, which had been comforting earlier, started feeling oppressive. I wasn't scared, not exactly, but something felt off. The quiet felt too complete, like the entire forest was holding its breath. I finally reached a clearing that seemed like a good place to stop for a break. It was a small, open patch in the woods, with a couple of boulders where I could sit and rest. I dropped my pack on the ground and sat on one of the rocks, pulling out my sandwich. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself that it was just a product of my overactive imagination. But then I heard it. A twig snapped. At first, I thought it was just another animal, maybe a deer or a squirrel. But then it happened again, this time closer and louder. My heart skipped a beat. My eyes darted around the clearing, searching for any sign of movement, but the trees were still. The forest was still. I had the sudden urge to stand up, to leave this place and keep moving. But something made me hesitate. I couldn't place it, but I had the feeling that leaving wouldn't make whatever it was go away. It would just follow me. So I stayed watching the trees. Seconds felt like minutes, minutes like hours. The silence stretched longer than it should have, and I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. And then I saw it, a shadow moving between the trees at the edge of the clearing. It wasn't large, but it was unmistakable. Something was there. Someone or something was watching me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't approach, but it didn't leave either. It just lingered at the edge of the forest, hidden behind the trunks of trees. I couldn't make out any details, just the vague outline of a person. My mind raced. Was it another hiker? Someone else on the trail? Or was it something else entirely? I didn't know, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. Slowly, I stood up, my pack still resting on the ground. I grabbed it quickly and started walking back toward the trail, my eyes constantly scanning the edges of the clearing. The shadow didn't move, but I could still feel it there, just out of sight, watching me. I picked up the pace, my heart pounding in my chest. Each step seemed to echo too loudly in the stillness. I wanted to turn around, but I didn't dare. Whatever that was, I didn't want to confront it. The trees seemed even more oppressive now, closing in tighter around the path as I made my way back. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. The trail seemed longer on the way back, each bend in the path stretching farther than I remembered. The sense of being followed grew stronger, like someone was just behind me, moving at the same pace, waiting for me to slip up. I pushed myself harder, my breath coming faster, my body starting to ache from the effort. And then I saw it again, the shadow, just at the edge of the trees, as though it had been waiting for me to notice. It was moving now, too. I could hear the soft crunch of footsteps behind me, not quite as loud as my own, but unmistakable. I couldn't take it anymore. I broke into a sprint, my legs burning as I dashed down the trail, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away. The sound of my footsteps grew louder, the beating of my heart loud in my ears. I stumbled once, twice, but I kept going, pushing myself harder and harder, willing myself to outrun whatever was behind me. But then, as quickly as it had started, the sound stopped. I skidded to a halt, breathless and gasping for air. The trail in front of me was empty. There was nothing there. No shadow, no footsteps, no figure lurking in the trees. Just the quiet, empty woods. I stood there for a long time, my body trembling from the adrenaline. What had just happened? Had I imagined it? Had it all been in my head? Maybe it had been a bear or some other animal. But why did it feel so deliberate? Why did it feel like I was being stalked? I waited for several minutes before deciding to keep going. I wasn't sure if it was the right decision, but I couldn't stand still forever, and I couldn't keep running. I continued down the path more cautiously this time. My eyes darted between the trees, and I felt the weight of the silence pressing down on me. Every rustle of leaves made me flinch. Every shadow seemed like it could be something waiting to spring out. But as I made my way back to the trailhead, the uneasy feeling gradually began to fade. The path seemed less oppressive, the trees less watchful. And when I finally reached my car, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. I didn't look back.